The first thing I think to acknowledge is anyone who's ridden a bike on the indoor trainer without a fan or been on the treadmill indoors without a fan realizes very quickly that our bodies are incredibly efficient at producing heat as we exercise. And we usually don't feel it when we're running or riding outdoors, but take away that cooling evaporative air blowing over us, and it really reveals how hot we get so quickly. And we produce tons and tons of heat. And to set the scene, sweating is our body's mechanism of getting rid of that heat. There's two kinds of sweating. There's sweat that's really efficient and evaporates off. And there's also sweat that's inefficient and is the stuff that you typically see pooling on your skin. The two are genetic. So some people, like for example, as a kid growing up, my dad would finish a run with me and he would literally wring his running vest out into the sink. He would be convinced he was really, really sweaty, and because his sweating was really inefficient. And so I think the numbers are something like you lose 4 times more water when it pools on your skin than you do when it evaporates away. So to a certain extent, you can't change that. Your body is one way or the other, but it has to get rid of that heat somehow. And sweating is the way it's going to do it. And so if you add into the mix a humid day when there's already a lot of water into the air, our sweating becomes much less efficient again. And it's even harder for our body to lose this heat. This is a long way around saying it's hard for our bodies to lose heat at the best of times. Put it in a hot and or humid day, and it's even more difficult for the body to lose heat.
Add on top of that, Rob, race intensity and race duration. It's very different doing a 45-minute run in the heat versus 10 hours, as the heat is increasing throughout the day, but also your engine essentially is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And there's a point where you can't turn that back round unless you stop. So you've got to be aware of the heat management throughout the day, which, very, very hard to do.
Yeah. And so the way that we can look, I think, at making our bodies more efficient is to understand that it's the blood's job to do 3 things. The blood delivers oxygen to the muscles. We all know that. It also delivers blood to the skin to dissipate heat, but it also delivers blood to the gut so it can deliver nutrients. So it's kind of being pulled in 3 directions when we're trying to do a triathlon in the heat. It's trying to deliver oxygen to the muscles, which is what we've trained it to do all day long. All of a sudden, there's this extra stress that more of it's getting pulled away from the muscles to the skin to dissipate the heat. And then you mentioned earlier, didn't you, the GI distress, the upset tummy, the feeling that I'm not either absorbing fluid or absorbing any calories in my stomach. And that's again because this blood's already being pulled in 2 directions. If that blood then gets shunted away from our GI system, it's much harder for it to help digest the calories and the fluid that we're putting in there. So it's got a big challenge on, and we've got to help it by preparing it ahead of time so that we can give it its best chance of helping us support the athletic endeavors we want to do on the day as well.
And how much time what's the timeline? In terms of if an athlete checks the weather, they've got 2 weeks before their race, they see that it's going to be a lot hotter than they used to. Is 2 weeks enough for an athlete to heat adapt?
It looks like it is from the research that's out there. It looks like the 2 week to 3 week time frame is enough for the 3 things we're going to talk about, or a combination of 2 of the 3 things that we're going to talk about, to have some kind of material effect. Now, some of them are more unpleasant than others. We've got to say that up front, but they can and do have an effect relatively quickly. So I think the first thing that we can talk about is heat acclimation training. And that's essentially just training, feeling hotter than you would usually do. The time to do heat acclimation training is 3 weeks out to 1 week out before your event. That's when they think it seems to make the biggest difference. And we have to stress when we do this, we're just trying to get hotter than usual when we're training. It's best done on our easy effort, so we don't want any kind of hard efforts, hard intervals, none of that on these sessions. An easy or steady run or ride of 30 to 60 minutes, but indoors in a hot room with no fan, and even as you get better at this, wearing clothes to get even hotter, but only ever do these as easy sessions. The changes we're going to see by doing it, we're going to get an earlier sweat threshold, so you're going to start sweating sooner. we're going to have an increased sweat rate. So our body's going to learn to sweat more and it's going to be able to dissipate more heat because of that. And most crucially, I think, you feel easier in the heat. You feel more comfortable. And I think mentally you're more used to it. You just kind of feel more ready to exercise in the heat with sort of heat acclimation training. And initially, they don't need to be any more complicated than doing some training for 30 minutes, easy, wearing clothes indoors on the trainer, and gradually progress. So you do a little bit more each time. Never do your hard sessions, never do your key sessions with the heat. But that sort of little and often thing can really make a difference.
I can't stress that one enough. And I've seen plenty of athletes get this wrong where you have that stress of race day coming and you think, I need to be doing race intensity to get the full benefit, to see how it feels. But I think you've got to separate training and preparation for the actual conditions. And they're two very different things.
Yes,
So
definitely.
when you're doing this heat acclimation stuff, don't approach it as I'm looking to get fitter, I'm looking to get stronger, looking to develop my aerobic capacity. It's nothing to do with that. You're literally teaching your body at a cellular level and increasing your sweat rate, etc. And that has to happen at the lowest intensity possible. Even zone 1 is absolutely brilliant. So don't be tempted to, increase the watts to race intensity, because that's going to unravel pretty quickly.
Yeah. So if you've got any hard stuff in your training plan, any sweet spot work, any FTP work, and any of that harder stuff, don't do that with the heat acclimation. But your shorter e-pace runs, your shorter aerobic rides, your recovery rides even can be done indoors on the trainer, wearing clothes, get used to being really, really hot. So it isn't rocket science. And in fact, if we look at the example of Anders, who raced really well recently at Ironman Hamburg, he'd done little extra sessions every day. He'd do 30 minutes. If he didn't have an easy session, he'd add one in just to ride his bike at the end of the day for 30, 40 minutes, wrapped up in clothes. We saw some photos, didn't we, of him looking incredibly uncomfortable. But his comments over a 14-day period went from essentially, oh my God, there is no way that a human being can tolerate this, to all the way at the end, a gradual move towards, I'm ready. I did that. My core temperature, he used one of those core temperature sensor things as well, so he could see how hot he was getting. Our core was up over 40, felt fine. I'm hot, but I can deal with it. And that's the place we want an athlete to be, isn't it? That they know that they're hot, but you can just deal with it. It's the same, I think, when you go on holiday. A mental change happens over 7 days, where if you go to the Canaries, the first day there, you just think, it's just too hot for human life here. And then by the last day, you can go for a run or a ride quite happily in it and feel really comfortable.
Totally. I think a massive takeaway is little and often is going to be far more beneficial than one weekly, 3-hour indoor ride without a fan. Please don't do that. It's going to create a negative effect. You want the little and often every, 24 to 48 hours. If you can get one of these really short sessions, even if it's 15 minutes on a treadmill, windows closed, in the heat of day, is going to be far more beneficial than trying to do your 2-hour, let's say, run indoors. You can literally fry yourself, and it's going to have the negative effect where you can't train efficiently the next day, which is then going to have a negative effect on your overall fitness and preparation for race day. So really try and differentiate and separate training and heat acclimation as two very separate objectives and goals.
Absolutely. So that's kind of dealt with heat acclimation training, or at least it's introduced the idea to people. There's two other things that people can do as well in order to get their bodies ready. And this is really, I think, the things that drives the main physiological adaptation, which is an increase in blood plasma volume, which is the thing that's really going to help people on race day. The two other things we can talk about, long-time listeners will have heard you talk about this with your Kona preparation. We can either do, and it's either hot water immersion or a sauna protocol after training. The idea of both of these is like that. It's not very nice, is it? Let's be honest about it. It is a really physically challenging, mentally, physically unpleasant thing to put yourself through in order to be able to get the last few % of chance reduced that you'll melt down on race day. So let's go through both of these things and talk through. Obviously, I think Sauna protocol is dependent on either A, you're doing your workout at the gym, you've got a sauna there. I think very few people have got access to a sauna really in their own house, certainly in the UK. And then the hot water immersion we can talk through as well. So sauna protocol first. What we're looking at doing here in its basic form is getting into a sauna straight after a workout for initially 10 to 15 minutes and building up to 30 minutes. No hydration while you're in the sauna, no hydration for the last 15 minutes of your workout, and essentially sitting in there for that period of time, being uncomfortably hot already from your workout and enduring as hot as you can endure for the 10 to 15 to 30 minutes.
This is I've just got flashbacks of some horrible moments in
Now, I've never done this, and I know you have. So
Mm.
talk us through your experience.
It's really unpleasant and it's really easy to get wrong. And I think in the early stages, I actually got it wrong where I was pushing myself too hard, not in training, but in the sauna. And I was
Yeah.
thinking an extra 5 minutes, an extra 5 minutes. And I'd just sit there to the point of, nearly shaking and feeling dizzy. And if you get any of those symptoms, you're overcooking it. Just get out, cool
Yeah.
down. And it's better to kind of break up that session of even 5 minutes in and then 30 seconds out just to rehydrate if you have to, and then put yourself back in. You want to avoid that. I don't know how else to explain it apart from you just feel cooked, literally as if you're in an oven. And so the way that I used to do it was I'd do a really easy jog to the sauna, which for me was 30 to 40 minutes easy running, and I'd make sure that I'd kept that really easy. It was very tempting to run home because I was really fit at the time, but actually just doing an easy jog. And the point there is just to build up that core temperature. You don't need to be working on fitness or any of those other elements. And then I started with around 7 minutes in the sauna. I'm not very good with heat, so I feel very kind of stressy and uncomfortable in the heat. And initially I had in my plan that I was going to do 15 minutes on the first session. But after 7 minutes, I was feeling dizzy, very stressed, very uncomfortable, and I was hating it and felt as if my head was going to implode. So if you're getting those feelings, just be careful. Maybe you feel as if you can do a little bit longer, but you've got to look at this as a long-term picture. You've got to feel okay in a few hours. You've got to feel okay the next morning because you've got a hard swim or a hard run. So look at the long-term picture, and little and often is going to be the way forward. So I built it up as 7 minutes, and then I added an extra 3 minutes every session, if that felt okay. And luckily enough, it did. But after the first session, to be honest, the next day impacted me, and I had to miss a training session. And so that's that fine balance of you want to be heat adapted, but you also want to be really fit on the start line. So you're going to have to balance those cards really, really delicately. So for me, it was 7 minutes in, and then I'd add an extra 3 minutes every other day. And I did that for 2 to 3 weeks. And by the time I actually got off the plane in Hawaii, a lot of the people around me were, instantly off the plane, you get hit with that oven heat, and there or thereabouts, you basically know if you're going to be okay. A lot of the people were saying, this is unbearable. I'm hating life already.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, it was like, this is uncomfortable, but I'm comfortable with that. It's okay because I've been uncomfortable for the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it's a very, very fine line. And so for those that are thinking that they're the kind of athlete that would benefit from a bit of heat acclimation, then I'd start with the little and often. If in doubt, keep it on the lower end of how long you want to stay in that sauna. Don't look to be a hero in those first 2 sessions. Don't, just because we're talking about 15 to 30 minutes, doesn't mean 29 minutes is better than 14 minutes. Stick to 14 or 15 minutes to start with and build it up slowly. It's it's the kind of endurance training rule of the 10% increase in the first few sessions should be very easy, and you should bounce back from them. Apply that to heat as well.
I think it's like you said, you've got to be super aware of how you react to it. I know exactly what you mean. If you get into the sauna when you're hot, 5 minutes can feel like an eternity. And if that's the case, 5 minutes and you're done for the day. And if the next time you can make 6 or 7, then great. But even those 5 minutes are going to make a really big difference. If people can do this consistently every day for a 10-day period, and that's what the research has shown, it's that this combination of heat acclimation training with sauna protocol or with hot water immersion over a sort of a 2-week period leading up to race day, stopping 3 days before race day, can be really, really effective. And even if it is only 5 minutes in the sauna, it's really going to be helping. But the thing you said there is key. There's other stuff going on as well as trying to do sauna protocol here. It's not just about how long can you last in the sauna. You have to be able to do your training during your taper as well. And you have to not feel altered afterwards. I think that's a really good sign. If you come out and your head's spinning and you don't feel right, then you've overdone it. And it's like with anything, it's much better to stay just this side of the threshold than to go even very slightly over that side of the threshold.
At this stage in your training, you're going to be stressing your body an enormous amount. So it's not just about the preparation in terms of heat management, but also, respect the process that your body's going through in terms of recovering from that session you did either that day, the day before, or the day before that. So you don't want to compromise recovery where you're shocking your body to the point where it's kind of in shutdown mode. You just want to be feeding it a little bit of heat so it can adapt to that heat and then go again, maybe a little bit longer, 72 hours, let's say, later. But don't look to be a hero in those first few sessions. And I've seen plenty of athletes do that, and suddenly their training is totally derailed. They can't hit any of the numbers that they were doing, even a week before that. And that's because they're not getting the sufficient recovery, the sufficient hydration. And so it's a very, very fine line, and you can get it very wrong. So yeah, please be careful. And if you're not sure and if you need a bit of advice and guidance on how you're going to do that, please get in touch. We'd hate to think that athletes are going away from this podcast and, essentially cooking themselves and doing the opposite of what we want.
Be careful. Yeah. And I think that the next most important thing here is we're trying to drive an increase in blood plasma volume. So we're making our bodies very hot. We've then got to make sure we rehydrate with water and electrolytes as soon as we get out of that sauna. So we've said no hydration while you're in there, no hydration for the last 10 or 15 minutes before you go in there. But as soon as you're out, we need you to replace about 1.5 times the amount of water and electrolytes that you've lost when you're in there. So an interesting thing to do is to weigh yourself before and after, work out how much you have sweated out. It's almost like a super compensation thing. If we can get more water and electrolytes into your body here after it being hot, the theory is your body essentially sucks them all up, and we can end up with this increased blood plasma volume because we've got a little bit more fluid into you. So that's the same for the sauna protocol and for the hot water immersion protocol we'll talk about. It's about focusing on rehydrating as soon as you're out of the sauna or the hot water as well. So let's go on to the hot water immersion protocol. I think this one is something that is possibly a little bit more accessible to athletes because most people have got a bath in the house. It's arguably even more brutal feeling than sitting in a sauna, I think. I've tried this one myself and I found it very, very challenging. Again, it's a similar sort of lead in here. You do it post-workout. We're going to look to work up to 30 minutes in the hot water, but we've got to be careful working up to that. And if you're only in for 5 minutes the first time, that's fine. The bath of hot water has got to be up to your neck. It's got to be as hot as you can stand it, and ideally up to 40 degrees centigrade, which is really, really, that's as hot as it feels boiling when it's coming out of the tub. It's really, really hot. And ideally here, again, we're looking for 10 sessions over 10 consecutive days, starting 14 days out before race day, finishing 3 or 4 days before race day. The benefits of this clinically were shown to last up to 2 weeks after the protocol finishes, but they drop off over that sort of 5 to 7 day period. So you're good over race weekend if you finish 3 or 4 days before race day with this one. And again, as soon as you're out of the water, it's rehydrating with electrolytes and fluids for 1.5 times the fluid loss. And I think, again, this is easier for the weighing because often people have got scales in the bathroom. They can weigh themselves as they get into the water, weigh themselves afterwards. People will be surprised how much weight they lose in 30 minutes in a very hot bath post a workout. Again, the challenge here is to not drink while you're in the hot water, to not drink for the 15 minutes of exercise leading up to it. because it feels incredibly hard and unpleasant and challenging, doesn't it?
I think you've got to do your best to get in that meditative state and not be too concerned about. I think you've got to separate again what we talked about earlier from training and heat prep. And if you really approach this as just heat prep, it's basically a lot of the game is the mental game. So if you can find that really calm narrative in your mind and kind of let everything go, let the pain go, just be careful that you don't, stay in there longer than you want. But apart from that, you can kind of get in that meditative state where you can detach yourself from that very real pain that you're going through. And that's kind of what you're going to be going through on race day. Your body is going to be saying, stop, stop, stop. Your brain's going to be saying, stop, stop, stop. But you need to find that really quiet space in your mind that actually encourages you to carry on for whatever reason. And so this is exactly what I was doing in the sauna. Everything was telling me to stop even after 3 minutes. But if you can find that quiet space, you can kind of get over the hump of everything screaming stop. And then your body and mind come into that state where it understands that you're in control and you're going to be staying in there a little bit longer. And that's exactly what happens on race day. No one gets to that half marathon point in an Ironman and feels excited, feels fresh. That's just not the reality of the sport you're in. So use this as a little bit of an opportunity to kind of explore your mental strength, your mental ability to endure the uncomfortable reality of what you'll be going through. So embrace it. If you can embrace that suffering when you're in the comfort of your own home, the likelihood is that you're going to be able to translate that into something quite special on race day.
I really like that, Chris. I think it's such an underrated and underspoken about aspect of racing. The fact that Chris McCormack used to say, didn't he, that anybody can win Hawaii when you're watching the TV and it's an hour-long show and there's music playing. But the reality of what running through the lava fields actually feels like, and there is no music playing and there is no air conditioning on, it's a very different thing to be able to mentally endure what you're going through. And I think that's the big disconnect with a lot of people's race day experiences. In training, they've done a ride and the first 3 hours feel fantastic and they're really motivated to do an Ironman, and then the shorts start rubbing and the legs start hurting. The next 3 hours of the bike ride, every 5 minutes feels like another 3 hours because it's difficult and challenging. And if we haven't put ourselves in that place in training regularly enough where we overcome the brain's desire to tell us to stop doing these things, very, very hard on race day then to suddenly click into a space where you can deal with the heat if you've never had to deal with the heat, where you can deal with discomfort if you've never had to deal with discomfort. It's all about training our brains at the end of the day.
It's a very, very uncomfortable sport. That's why a lot of people sign up to it. But, in the past 10 days, I've had a lot of the athletes that I'm working with who have either done a race simulation weekend or a 2 to 3 hour run, which is starting to get pretty significant. And they're doing this in the middle of a training block. So there are elements of fatigue lingering there. And a lot of the comments, especially in the 3 hour run, are felt fine for 2 hours, felt great, but then don't know what happened. My legs were screaming, my posture was going, my mind was going. And as the coach, I'm seeing that. I'm thinking, this is absolutely brilliant. I want you to go through those experiences. It's very uncomfortable. And I'm sorry that athletes have to go through that, but we all have to go through that, especially if you're looking at middle distance and long distance. The reality is that they're going to be multiple hours of real difficulty. And when you add heat on top of that, things, can be extremely uncomfortable. So you have to be ready with that. And this podcast is about getting you physically ready for that by doing different heat protocols. But don't forget the mental element that you need to be willing and open to that level of being uncomfortable for hours on end. So these, hot water immersion and sauna protocols and sitting on the turbo, sweating a huge amount is exactly what this is all about. You're teaching your body, but you also need to teach your mind how to cope with it.
100%. Right, let's wrap this up then. Let's give a quick overview of what we've talked about here then. So in order to get yourself ready to race in the heat, we need to be looking at the 2 weeks, the 14 days or so before race day. And we're combining 2 of heat acclimation training with either hot water immersion or the sauna protocol. We're looking at doing your easy rides and runs, hot and uncomfortably hot, indoors, treadmill or trainer, wearing clothes, no fan on, being very hot and uncomfortable. And then as soon as you're done with that, doing either the hot water immersion or the sauna protocol. We've got to be really clear that we only want the heat acclimation training sessions to be done in our easy sessions, not in our very hard or our very long sessions. And then we're going to gradually build up our tolerance of either the sauna or the hot water, and expect it to feel really difficult and challenging the first few times you do it. But you will see small but measurable progress along the way. And as long as you are doing that, you are going to be helping your body to increase blood plasma volume, and ultimately you're going to be more successful come race day.
My final comment, which I think will be a useful one for the athlete, is you have to be open-minded to adapting your race intensity, so your watts or your pace, when you're either training or racing in the heat. And a good starting point is 10 to 15%. So lower your watts by 10 to 15%, at least for the first hour during whether it's training or racing, because the likelihood is that your core temperature is just going to be steadily increasing throughout the day. And once it gets to a point, it's very hard to reverse unless you really knock it back to either crawling or walking. So be very aware that when you are racing in the heat, you're going to have to look at numbers that are a lot lower than what you're used to in training. And that's not a representation that you're not as fit or not as strong. It's just that you have to race the conditions that are ahead of you. A lot of people are confused why the top athletes in the world end up walking in the hottest races in the world. You know, look at Kona as a great example. Everyone's really confused why, whether it's the top age groupers or the top pros, everyone's walking. Is it to do with the conditions? Yeah, to a degree. But the reality is that a lot of us, or a lot of them, are racing at the intensities that they used to racing around the world, which aren't the same as Hawaii. So you have to race the conditions there. So protect yourself, protect the back end of your marathon as always, and kind of have that foresight that your core temperature is going to be higher and higher and higher. So protect it as much as you can on race day as well.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, Chris, it's worth athletes remembering that we all recognize that Ironman especially is an energy limited event more than it is a fitness limited event. It's about how many calories you can process while you're out there. And if your body all of a sudden has got to shift loads of its blood to the skin to get rid of the heat, and there's less available in the gut to digest food, you're not going to be able to digest as many calories as you could. So if you don't slow down, eventually your body's going to make you slow down, because those calories are just going to be sitting in your gut and not going to be digested. And I think often athletes who have really bad, call it GI distress on hot days, it's not necessarily down to doing anything wrong other than not slowing down from the numbers that they would usually go at, which just means the body's not able to absorb what they would usually absorb.
Yeah. A lot of athletes fall into the kind of trap of the narrative being, for some reason, the gels that we're taking on the day weren't the right ones. So they'll start testing with other gels. But actually, I think they're looking under the wrong stone. You need to be looking at how you adapted your race strategy in terms of pacing. And a lot of the time people aren't. They're stuck in, I race at 200 watts, whether it's hilly, whether it's flat, whether it's raining, or whether it's in Kona. And that is just not the reality of how the body adapts to these elements. So yeah, be very cautious in the heat. I think, we've all seen it with top level athletes get it wrong, and we're no different. So yeah, be very cautious, and if anything, build into the day, as you should anyway, but even more so, and start at a lower threshold and try and manage it through that way.
Yeah, brilliant. Right, good. I think we've covered all of that stuff there. Hopefully that's helped loads of people out. Again, any questions, please feel free to fire them through to help@oxygenaddict.com. Okay then. That brings us to the end of this week's episode. So here are some discount codes and deals for you. Over at precisionfuelandhydration.com, use the code OXYGEN24 for 15% off your first electrolyte order. And over at teamoxygenaddict.com, I think we've got the most comprehensive triathlon coaching program for busy age groupers. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today and the advice has helped you out, well, great stuff. I hope that's helped put some of your fears at rest. And I know from some of the calls we've had, it's helping raise the right questions in the minds of people as to whether their current coaching relationship is working for them. If you're looking for a change, or if you're looking for high quality, proven coaching for Ironman or 70.3 triathlon this year, you can just check out the details of our coaching packages on our website at teamoxygenaddict.com. And then if you're interested, there's a link in the show notes below. You can join our waiting list and you'll be notified if a slot becomes available. And at that point, you'll have a chance to book a call with us and see if you'd be a good fit for joining the team. So although we don't have slots available at the moment, we'll make those call appointments available to people as and when we do have athletes who end their coaching packages during the season, if and when that happens. So remember, there's links in the show notes, so you don't have to remember them. Till next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby, and you've been listening to the Oxygen Addict podcast. See ya.